So by contrast, conservatives are much more likely to say, well, can't we just change the existing institutions that we have a little bit, modify them slightly, fix them in a way that respects the fact that they're so old and so traditional and all that sort of thing. So Oakeshott also says that rationalists look at politics as a series of crises. You know, they lurch from crisis to crisis. You know, there's always a big disaster on our horizon. And in doing this, they think about the world in the same way that an engineer does. Right? An engineer sort of, let's say we're building the bridge from Macau to Hong Kong, and we see water, and we see, well, there's Hong Kong, we want to get there. Okay, let's use our understanding of universal laws to get us there, right? We know we can manipulate the physical environment in certain ways, you know, stick some steel, some concrete, all that other stuff in a certain way, and we know, based on science, that the bridge is going to work, right? I mean, most of us have faith that it's going to work. We don't know. We're just guessing that it's going to work. But we trust engineers, and so we will still cross the bridge and believe that it's going to work. Okay, now, Oakeshott says that, well, universal solutions in politics are different. Because he thinks that, well, political institutions are not the same as the natural world. Right? Human societies are not the same as the physical world. The way that we do things as human beings has evolved over a long period of time into all of these distinct individual cultures. It's not the same as taking a universal law like in physics or chemistry and applying it. You know, there's more complexity involved. Right, so the political implication of this is that there's a long list of stuff that Oakeshott disagrees with in his book, right? Because he says, well, these are the upgrades of rationalism. Okay, he opposes the United Nations. He says, well, there's no, like, the United Nations is a rationalist understanding of how world politics should work. You know, every country should get representation. Why should every country get representation, he says? You know, some countries are simply better than others. Why do we let the inferior countries talk? You know, they have nothing good to say. Why do we give them a platform and listen to them? You know, why do we give them equal rights? Why do we give this idea of universal human rights? Oh, shock! There's a Western thinker who disagrees with universal human rights. Okay, rationalism says universal human rights make sense. Oakeshott says they don't. Right? So, not everybody should have rights. Some people are good and say good things, and some people are useful, and some people aren't. Why do we treat those people the same way? Right? He opposes the idea of national or racial self-determination. You know, he's actually pro-imperialist in the objective sense. You know, he thinks that it's okay for countries to conquer other countries. Why? Because that's the way it's been throughout history. You know, throughout history, countries have always conquered other countries. It's only in the 20th century we decided that was wrong, right? In the 20th century we started with this idea that, well, actually self-determination should exist. Actually people should be able to self-determine and not get conquered by other people, and they should be able to self-govern, and that that's a value, right? But traditionally, conquest is the normal way that the world works. And for Oakeshott, that's the way it should still work. Okay, meritocracy in the civil service. Pretty much the only reason any of you are going to get a job once you leave this university. Right? If you want to get a job for the civil service, right? You're going to get it because of a meritocratic system. In other words, you have some knowledge, you do good on the exam, you do good in your job, and you'll get a job in the civil service, and you'll get promoted based on doing good. Okay? Historically, that's not how the civil service worked. Historically, we picked people who are loyal to the king. Family members or friends or people like that. Friends of the people in power, because we can trust friends of the people in power. Okay? That's how it worked. And the right of women to vote and make political decisions. Now, Oakeshott will say, well, if we look at women in history, they've never had political power. And then his argument is, well, that makes them terrible at political power. Right? They haven't, because, of course, if all knowledge comes from experience, and if a group of people have zero experience about something, they have zero knowledge about it, they're going to be bad at it. So therefore, let's exclude them totally from political power. Right? Let's take away all of women's political rights, because they suck at politics because they've never done it, right? Men have always done politics. That makes them good at it, at least better than women, right? So these are examples of ways of thinking that can be generated by conservative thought. They're based on a theory of knowledge, right? It should be obvious to you by now that like all of these theories rest on what we call an epistemology, so a theory of how knowledge exists, okay? So for Oakeshott, his theory of knowledge is based on this division between technical and practical knowledge. Technical knowledge is like the type of knowledge we can formulate into rules. If I want to learn how to cook something, you know, I can Google a recipe, and the recipe will say you need these ingredients, you follow this method, if you do that, you'll have the dish that you want to make, right? Now we know in practice that just because I've read a recipe for cooking doesn't make me good at cooking. I'm terrible at it, you know, I'm horrible at cooking. You know, I could read 50 recipes, I could memorize them all, I could learn everything about them. I would still be terrible at cooking. Why? Oakeshott says the reason why is because I don't have practical knowledge, right? I can only acquire practical knowledge in use. Practical knowledge is the type of knowledge that we can't formulate into rules. It's like if your friend asks you, well, you're good at something, you're good at that thing. Teach me how to do it, right? Tell me how you're so good at it. Now, if you've ever said to somebody, I don't know how to explain to you why I'm good at that thing, right? I can't teach you how to be good at that thing. You just have to know, you just have to do it. Only by doing it can you become good at it. That's practical knowledge, right? That's what he's talking about in terms of practical knowledge. Now, most activities, according to Oakeshott, need both technical and practical knowledge. Now, if you're good at cooking, yes, you'll know lots of things. You'll know how to make lots of different recipes. But more importantly, you'll learn these immeasurable things through practice, right? Certain techniques and stuff that's very hard to explain, but very easy to do once you actually do them, because you have that practical knowledge. Now, from this theory of knowledge, what we'll see is that Oakeshott draws significant political implications. You know, if this is how knowledge works, if we can divide knowledge into technical and practical, what does that mean for politics? Well, Oakeshott says that theories and ideologies are basically technical knowledge. They're political knowledge that's sort of turned into a theory, like in a book or a manifesto or a document of some kind, right? So we can express them as a series of propositions. This is what we want society to be. Here is a list of changes that we'd make. But traditions, you can't write them down so easily. Like if we take the tradition of marriage, for example, irrespective of what culture we're talking about. If you look at the way people get married, the customs and traditions they follow, why they exist, the roles and responsibilities of every different person involved in the wedding, all the different family members, all the different functions, the priest, everything. Right? That would take an extremely long time to write down all of the different things that happen and why they happen. Right? So, but you probably know all of these things, right? You know in your own culture how these things happen. But you know it based on practical knowledge. You know it because you've seen it happen since the time you were born. Like you've seen friends and family members get married, you see the way they get married and all that sort of thing, right? So practical knowledge is certain because it's based on experience. You know, this is what Oakeshott's saying. Technical knowledge is an illusion. Technical knowledge only makes sense in the context of pre-technical knowledge. In other words, it only makes sense to learn recipes if you know how to cook things. If you're a terrible cook, learning recipes doesn't make any sense at all. Right? Now, you can probably guess the political implications of this, right? Oakeshott thinks that rationalism in general is the politics of inexperienced people. You know, he says that there's three basic problems with European society, and the result of all of these problems is inexperience. You know, so there's the new ruler. In other words, societies are unstable whenever a new political party or a new power or a new king or something comes to power. And that's been the case throughout history. Why? New kings are not very good at ruling, right? So they'll look at China's history, for example, and they're like, oh, why did the Qing dynasty collapse? Oh, because a new ruler came to power, didn't know what it was doing, and it collapsed. That's it. Simple explanation, inexperience. Right? Next, the new ruling class. Oakeshott looks at the capitalist class and says, well, it's a new class. For most of human history, we've had kings and emperors and stuff making political decisions. That collapsed, and now the capitalist class makes political decisions, and they're not very good at it. Right? And worse than them, the working class hasn't had power until 20th century. Right? Before that, they never had power. They're particularly inexperienced, and they're particularly terrible at making political decisions, right? And then lastly, the new political society. So for most of human history, democracy has not existed. We've had authoritarian systems of government. Democracy became a thing in like the late 19th and early 20th century, and then, more popular towards the end of the 20th century, right? And he says the reason it's not working so well is because it's a new political system. So for Oakeshott, if you are not part of a family that has experience in ruling, the first thing you're going to do is, well, I'll get a book or something. I'll get a book on how to rule, and I'll try and learn through technical knowledge. Or these days it's like, oh, you don't know how to do something. What's the first thing you do? Open an internet browser, go to Google, type in, how do I do X? Right? You're trying to learn things purely through technical knowledge. Imagine like, okay, maybe Trump gets into power and he gets elected. It's like, I'm a capitalist, I have no political experience. Let's get on Google and find out how to be president. Right? How to be president of the United States, and put it into Google and get the result. And hopefully there's a helpful, friendly YouTube guide that'll teach you how to do it, right? It'll teach you how to do it in a basic way. Oakeshott says the problem with that is it's only giving you technical knowledge. You're getting a list of things to do, but you don't have practical knowledge still, right? You're weak, you're inferior, you're from this inexperienced background with no grasp on what politics actually is, because you've never had political power, right? The working class never had political power. So, here's their critique of Marx and Engels, the socialist theorists who we'll look at next week. It says, well, the biggest problem with Marx and Engels is that they tried to give political theory to the working class, something that they should never have done. Why? Because the working class have never had political power, which means they're bad at political power, they're bad at politics. Why would you try and involve people who are bad at politics in politics? Why wouldn't you just keep them outside the political system, right? So Oakeshott says about Marx and Engels that they wrote for a class less politically educated than any other that has ever come to have the illusion of exercising political power. Right? A devastating statement that basically says, well, here's a group of people that have no business in government. They should be so far away from power, they should never come anywhere near having political power. Why? Because historically they've had no experience of it, and only experienced people ever make good decisions, according to this theory. So, from all of this, we can take some basic implications. Firstly, Oakeshott has no problem with the idea that some people have relative privileges over other people. In fact, he says it's these very privileges that gives them the ability to rule. Right? Kings should be richer than the common people. That's what enables them to be good at ruling. Right? That's what gives them the experience of ruling. Right? Secondly, Oakeshott rejects democracy. Right? He's an anti-democratic theorist, or at least he says democracy should be limited only to those people who have some experience of political power. If you're a person who doesn't know anything about politics, Oakeshott will be the first person to say, well, you shouldn't have political rights. What the hell are you doing making political decisions? You have no basis of knowledge about politics. So stay out. Don't involve yourself in something you don't know about. Okay, here's some criticisms of Oakeshott and of this general, I suppose, conservative worldview, I suppose. We need to look at the other side. When it comes to rationalism, it's true that at one point, rationalism was a new idea. Right? The French Revolution represents the starting point, I suppose, of this idea, where we rationally critique the way the society works and try and change it in a way that makes sense, according to logic. The difference is that now, rationalism is not a new idea, it's an old idea. You know, the French Revolution was over 200 years ago. So can we really say that rationalism isn't a tradition in some places? You know, conservatives are all about protecting and defending traditions. Doesn't that commit them to protecting and defending rationalism once it becomes a tradition? You know? So where rationalism exists, conservatives should say that what we need to defend is rationalism against alternative other ideas. You know, they're not advocating a return to a past political order, this type of thinking we call reactionary thought. You know, we try and go back to a previous period in history. The other big problem with his book, Rationalism in Politics, if you read it, you can read it and you think, oh, well, at some point, he's going to tell us what he actually wants. He's going to tell us what he wants us to do. He's going to tell us what he wants the government to do. He's going to tell us what policy he supports. No, he doesn't, right? You get to the end, and the whole thing is just a huge criticism of other people's ideas. You know, what he hates about the world, and what he hates about liberalism and socialism. He never actually says what he likes. You know, it's very easy as a theorist to be elusive like that, where you tell everybody what you hate and you criticize actually existing ideas, but you never actually say what you want. It makes you impossible to criticize. So the last theorist we'll look at today is Leo Strauss, particularly influential in what we call neoconservatism, which is a way of thinking that had a large impact on world politics, primarily through the United States and its foreign policy in the early 21st century. So we'll see that Strauss and his argument is very different than Hume, Burke, and Oakeshott. It's based on an idea which we call natural right. So what is natural right? So one of the biggest criticisms that Strauss has of current political thought is that it's based on cultural relativism. You know, this idea that there's no right or wrong, there's just different cultural perspectives, right? That's what we call cultural relativism. And Strauss basically says that, well, natural law is an argument that human nature is objective, and that there are things that are objectively better and worse. So relativism, according to this perspective, is a stupid way of thinking. You know, why would we want to say that every type of culture and perspective is equal? Strauss will say, well, no, some cultures are objectively superior than others because they have objectively superior values, right? And there's no reason to treat all cultures as equal if some are better than others. So, based on this theory, we can see that human nature is a central part of the theory, right? But then the question is, what is human nature? You know, we could look at human nature in two ways. Nature is our beginning. So how were we created, or how did we come to exist, right? We might know how things begin because somebody told us. You know, somebody at some point, you asked, where did I come from? And your parents probably lied to you, said it wasn't the result of sex at all. You know, probably that's how, I don't know, that's how most parents behave, at least in Australia. Or secondly, we can look at nature as the character of something. So what is something based on our experience of it? Right, so far, all the previous conservative thinkers have told you you can know things through experience. You know, your primary sensory experience tells you what something is. Right? So Strauss then says that, well, in order to understand human nature, we must understand our origins. And in particular, he comes from what we call the Judeo-Christian tradition. So Judaism and Christianity are related. They share a creation story. They share significant parts of their religious beliefs, particularly the creation story in the Bible. And in there, that makes a number of claims about what human nature is. You know, that we're inherently sinful and that we inherently do the wrong thing, and a bunch of other stuff, right? But the same argument can be applied to basically any creation story, right? Almost every creation story tells us something about what human nature is, according to the society that believes it. Now, if we agree with this story, that means we're accepting the authority of some kind of religious text, right? We're accepting a version of how the world was created and a version of what our human nature is, a version of what society is based on this text. Okay, so nature is also the character of something, so how it works. So if our human nature is knowable, it should be knowable based on the way that it is, based on its material factors, I guess. Now, Hume looks at sensory experience as the way we can tell what something is. You know, how do we know that a dog is a dog? Well, we experience its dogness, right? It barks and it's a dog, it has 4 legs and it's a dog, you know, it runs in a certain way and it's a dog. We identify as a dog based on seeing it or smelling it or identifying it that way and connecting it to other dogs that look the same as it. Right now, Strauss has a huge problem with this empirical approach that's adopted by Hume and Oakeshott and those other conservative thinkers. Why? Because we can't see morals and values. So the deepest things that conservatives want to protect are things that you have no ability to experience in a direct sensory way. You know, God. I hope none of you have seen God. A little terrified of you guys already. But if anybody claims to have actually touched God, be scared of that person, right? Now, the problem with this theory then is, well, Strauss says God's the most important thing. Your whole concept of who you are comes from the creation story you accept, comes from these religious texts and stuff like that, and yet the rest of your way of understanding human nature is based on direct experience, based on science, based on evidence, right? So his accusation is basically that Hume and the other conservative thinkers are too captivated by rationalism. They're too influenced by this scientific thought. Stop trying to prove that God exists. It just objectively exists, right? It's a value, it's a moral. God said so, that should be good enough for you, right? Don't try and touch it, see it, or smell it. It's just there. So this idea of natural right comes from ancient Greek philosophy, and it basically says, well, you have a human nature, it's fixed and given. Your job is not to make decisions about yourself, you know, to decide what you're going to be, to decide your purpose, to choose your destiny, right? Your job is just to become what you're supposed to be, right? To fulfill your function. That's how you become the happiest possible person, right? And when you become what you should be, that's the best possible thing, no matter what. So according to this theory of natural right, human nature is a fixed and a given thing. We're always the same. We'll always be the same. You know, there is not going to be change in human nature. We're always going to be the same as what somebody said we would be, right? God says you're selfish, you're selfish. You're always going to be selfish. You'll never not be selfish, right? So human nature is seen as change, like totally unchangeable, change resistant. Nothing we can possibly do will change our human nature, according to this way of thinking. So the political implications of this is that those people who have the greatest wisdom are entitled to rule over those people who don't have wisdom, right? Some people are born leaders, and those people's job is to rule over everybody else, right? And in fact, the more wisdom a person has, the more power they're entitled to have. You know, there's a direct relationship between those two things, right? Plato, for example, was one of the first people to argue this. The ancient Greek philosopher said that the world should be ruled by philosopher kings, right? Take all the most intelligent people in the world, make them the government, and make the stupid people do what they're told, right? That this would be the ideal form of government, where we totally exclude the people without wisdom from it at all times. And that would be the best way to do it. And it's this same logic behind why the neoconservatives argue that taxes against the rich are bad. You know, they'll say, what do poor people do with money? If you give them money, I don't know, they'll have more children, or they'll buy cigarettes, or they'll go drinking, or they'll waste it. You know, I remember going home on a rickshaw in India one time, and I paid the driver more than what the agreed price was. And then somebody said to me, it's like, oh, why did you do that? He's just going to spend his money on alcohol. I thought to myself, wow, that's such a nice thing to say about that person. You know, how do you know? Maybe he's going to invest the money in a long-term interest bond or something like that. You know, realistically, what do people think about poor people? They make bad economic decisions. The reason you're poor is that you're like stupid. You smoke too much, or you drink too much, or you're just not very intelligent with your money, right? That's what people say. Right, but what do rich people do with money? Oh, they invest it. You know, they save it. They invest it. They use their money productively. Right? So therefore, neoconservative arguments will say, well, we should tax poor people because, you know, it's better that they don't spend the money. You know, they're going to make crap decisions anyway. Why don't we just take some of their money through taxes and we'll use that to support the government? And even better, we could transfer the money from the poor to the rich, because the rich people, they make good decisions with their money, right? They use their money productively. Their investments generate wealth and generate jobs for the whole society. So taxing them, well, that would be criminal, right? If we tax the rich, we're not just hurting rich people, we're hurting everybody. Because what rich people do with their money is beneficial for us all, right? What poor people do for their money is bad for everybody, right? So therefore, tax the poor, not the rich. So next, conservatives oppose multiculturalism because they oppose cultural relativism. So here is the argument that, simply put, some cultures are superior to other cultures, and by that, their values are superior. You know, so as an American, Leo Strauss argued that, well, Americans love freedom in a way that other societies and cultures don't, right? They have a value, like freedom is the most important value, and our culture values freedom more than other people's, and therefore our culture is superior to other people's cultures, and therefore we're justified in changing other people's cultures to make them more freedom-loving as well, right? Freedom is a legitimate reason to interfere in the affairs of other countries, you know, in foreign policy. Right? So the extension of this is there's no need to encourage the existence of different cultures. If you really believe that some cultures are superior and some cultures are inferior, why would you defend the inferior cultures? Why would you defend their existence? Why would you let them continue to exist if you think that they're objectively worse than these superior cultures? Right? So Strauss says that superior cultures should continue to exist and the other cultures should just disappear off the face of the earth. So Strauss's ideas have been most influential in the field of foreign policy. And based on this idea, he says that it's important to resist tyranny because freedom is the most important value. And the problem with institutions like the United Nations is that they exemplify cultural relativism. You know? Now, in his worldview, some countries represent higher levels of values than others, but the United Nations flattens that and says, well, every country gets to vote, every country gets to speak, every country shares an equal stage with each other. And Strauss's point is basically, why should that be the case? You know, there are superior countries, there are inferior countries, some countries have better values than others. Why do we give the inferior countries space to talk? You know, why do we let them talk? Well, you can literally imagine at the moment. Why do we give the DPRK space to talk when their values are supposedly inferior to the United States? Why do they have an equal right to talk about international affairs than the United States does? Right? That's a neoconservative argument in practice. You know, so natural right justifies this idea that a nation can go against what other nations think is unjust. You know, so for example, this thinking was really popular when the US invaded Iraq in 2003. You know, the United Nations said invading Iraq would be illegal, immoral, and wrong. You know, and the neoconservative response to this is like, we don't care. You know, our values are superior to yours. We love freedom, you don't seem to. Therefore, we're going to bring freedom to Iraq militarily because you don't seem to want to. You're an immoral person for not wanting to invade, and we're going to do it, right? We don't care what the United Nations wants us to do. So today we've looked at four main thinkers in the conservative tradition, and we can see that despite the fact that they sometimes disagree with each other, they certainly agree with each other more than they disagree, right? The debates within conservatism are relatively minor. Conservatism is based on a rejection of rationalism. So a rejection of this idea that we can think scientifically and systematically about politics and what we should do about politics, right? So conservatism is probably always going to be an important political ideology, right? A type of idea that's critical. I mean, at the moment it's critical of liberalism and socialism, but I would probably say no matter what social system exists, there will always be people who try and defend it against change, right? And so conservatism will always have relevance for that reason, I guess. Always have relevance. You know, at the moment, conservatism is critical of both liberalism and socialism. You know, we've seen liberalism and what it basically represents. We'll talk about socialism in the next lecture. Conservatism criticizes both of these ideologies, mostly because these ideologies argue for significant social change. Alright, so that's it. We'll have a discussion class on Monday about liberalism and conservatism.